Well, good morning, friends. My name is Jen, if we haven't met yet, and I'm filling in this morning. Pastor Sherry will be back next week, and it is my privilege to get to share with you this morning. When our kids were growing up, one of our family's favorite things to do to beat the summer heat was to go to the movies. And we like to go and see the hero movies and watch all the heroes. And we would talk about which one is our favorite, who's your favorite, and who has the best powers. And so we used to debate about our heroes, the ones that we would watch. But I'm curious about maybe who was your favorite hero when you were younger? Was it Superman or Batman? Anybody? You know what? We almost. Okay, Pastor Sherry and I were talking, and we said Superman, Batman, or Roy Rogers. And we said, well, but yes. Okay, Gail, Roy Rogers, you got it. Maybe one of the reasons why we love heroes so much is because we see their struggles and their battles. And when they triumph over hardship or evil, it can encourage us. We might be a little short on the superpowers area, but we do have struggles. And when I see the good guy or the underdog get the win, it helps me feel more hopeful and encouraged. Well, we are in week 2 of this series called Heroes, and we're looking at accounts from heroes in the Old Testament. Now, our heroes don't have superpowers either, but they have taken the opportunity to tap in to the power of God and the amazing things that He can do in our lives and in the lives of others when we let Him. Now, last week we learned about Gideon, who considered himself the weakest, but with God, he was called from the pit and he experienced both moral and military victories. Now, today, we're going to be talking about Daniel, who eventually finds himself in a different kind of pit. Our first encounter with Daniel is after he became an exile in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. He and his 3 friends were among the young men of Israel's best and brightest, who were taken from their families to be trained to enter service under the king. For 3 years, they began to assimilate, where they were given new names. They were given instruction in Babylonian language and literature and traditions. And they were given a portion of choice food from the king's table. Now, Daniel was young. He was probably about 17 years old at this time. And Scripture tells us that he takes a bold stand with his captors here about eating the food and drinking the wine appointed by the king. Scripture tells us, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now, this is something you don't see every day. This young man is offered wine, but he refuses. The word resolve here means to firmly decide on a course of action. Daniel didn't just come to this decision in a moment. It was made by a predetermined commitment built on daily practices of faith. Daniel didn't just resist this food to be defiant. He had determined in his heart that he wanted to honor his relationship with God with his whole body. Now, Daniel had strong boundaries. He allowed himself to be brought to the palace, and there's no record of any objection to learning the Babylonian literature and culture. But when it came to what he thought would impact his relationship with God, he decided it was time to take a stand. Resolve is one area I would like to be better at following Daniel's example. I struggle with resolve when it comes to my food choices. I can do really well for a few days, eating the healthy stuff, getting my exercise in. But all it takes is being in a time crunch or getting a craving, and one spin through the drive-thru, and all of my hard work and good choices are sitting shotgun to a bag full of regret and French fries. Throughout Daniel's story, we see his consistent and steady commitment. He was wise, and he didn't try and stand strong in this resolve by himself. He had 3 other friends who made this resolve along with him. Together, they determined to honor God with the food that they ate, well, or rather, didn't eat. These 4 friends are the kind of friends that we're talking about when we mention doing life together. These guys intentionally united to maintain and grow in their discipleship. They were helping to keep each other accountable and strong. And we all can use a friend circle like this, where we have honest conversations and experience support, and we build each other up. Sometimes that means we have to tell each other some hard truths. The other day, I asked a friend for some feedback on something I was working on, and she started to tell me kindly about some parts that didn't work. This really kind of just confirmed what I was already kind of thinking, but I was hoping to avoid redoing the project. But her honesty helped me get a better result. Now, I also need friends who are willing to lovingly tell me, hey, you're kind of crossing the line here, or you're going out of these boundaries. To have friends like that also means that I need to be a friend like that. And I have to be willing to listen to and process their feedback and their input and not just jump to the defense mode. Now, for Daniel and his crew, not eating the king's food was harder than you might think. The officials in charge of the care of these young men, well, they were terrified of King Nebuchadnezzar. You'll see why later. But they didn't want to deviate from his instructions at all because basically they feared being beheaded. The young men's first request was denied. But here we start to see Daniel's negotiating skills come to light with a new proposal to their guard. He makes this request: please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the other young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away the choice food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. God honored the faithfulness of Daniel and his friends. And eventually, when it came time for them to be evaluated to enter into the service of the king, here's what they found about these guys. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better. So even though these young men were in exile, they purposed to seek and follow God, and God honored their faithfulness. They didn't harden their hearts toward God because of their circumstances, but they clung to him in the midst of them. They accepted being different with their food choices and different in who and how they worshiped, and that they were different in how they lived. They were faithful, and faithful people do faithful things. We learned later on in the book of Daniel that part of their daily routine was to pray 3 times a day. They would go to a quiet place and get on their knees. This consistent prayer empowered them to courageously take bold stands in the face of life-threatening adversity. If we want that kind of faith, Scripture repeatedly shows us that prayer isn't optional, but essential. The consistent prayer and posture is one other thing that I admire about Daniel. There is something about when I am praying on my knees, it seems like it resets my humility and it gives my attitude as I engage with the Lord. I also feel like it helps to keep my prayers more focused and intentional. Now, being on our knees isn't a rule, but it's an option. And I realize it's not a good option for all of us, because sometimes once we get down, we have a hard time getting back up. But when it comes to prayer, the only rule is to show up. Pete Greig, the founder of the 24/7 prayer movement, says that 99% of prayer is just showing up, making the effort to become consciously present to the God who is constantly present. Regular daily prayer times allowed these men to experience God's peace, presence, power, and direction to help them remain faithful. In chapters 2 and 3 in the book of Daniel, more is revealed about the kind of life and death challenges they faced. In the second chapter of Daniel, the king has a dream that is really troubling him. He is restless, he can't sleep, and he needs to know what it means. And most of the time when I dream, I have no idea what it was in the morning. I might remember in that instance when I startle awake, but in the morning, most of the time, I don't even remember I had a dream. But sometimes our dreams really stick with us. And the king's dream was troubling him. So he called all of his astrologers, magicians, and sorcerers all together. He demanded that they tell him the dream and that they tell him what it meant. But here's his catch. He wasn't going to tell them about the dream. He wasn't going to tell them anything. Because if someone could tell him the meaning, they should also be able to tell him what the dream was. Well, of course, no one could do this. And this rash ruler decided that if the advisors should all be put to death. And this included Daniel and his friends, who weren't even there. Now, as soon as Daniel heard about what happened, he went to the king and asked for more time to be able to discern the dream and its meaning. Then he gathered his friends together and they prayed. They prayed that God would reveal this dream and the meaning. God answered them and gave Daniel the revelation he had asked for, and then he explained it to the king. Their lives were spared, and this is how King Nebuchadnezzar responded. Will you read this with me? Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you will be able to reveal this mystery. Seeds are being planted here, and King Nebuchadnezzar is beginning to notice there is something different about this God of the Israelites. But it's not really enough. And in the next chapter, there's another life-threatening event for these devoted followers. The king, possibly inspired by his dream, builds this massive 60-foot golden statue, and he calls all the people together, and he says, we are all going to bow down and worship the statue or be thrown into the fiery furnace. So Daniel's 3 friends were there, and there's our Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But because of their faith, they refused to bow and worship any other god. Well, this infuriated the king, and so he ordered the men to be thrown into the furnace. But when he looked in, he saw 4 men instead of 3. And he said, didn't we put 3 men in there? But he also saw that none of them were being harmed by the heat and flames. So he called to the men to come out. And as they emerged, they were unharmed and unhinged. And the scripture says they didn't even smell like smoke. Again, God's power and their steadfast faith captures the attention of the king. And here's his response. Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. God continues to use the faith of these men, and after decades and a 7-year stint of living as a wild beast, you're going to have to read that one on your own. It's in chapter 4. His eyes turn towards heaven, and the king is transformed. He wrote, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." The constant examples of faith from Daniel and his friends contributed to the king's transformation. And I just want to encourage you this morning that if you have family or friends or people in your circle who are not followers, who are not believers, keep being consistent. Keep on keeping on. Keep following your faith, because we never know what seeds are planted. Now, Daniel continued to serve with excellence for decades under different rulers. And Daniel's success and leadership grew, and eventually he served under King Darius. Now, he was about to be promoted again, and this would have put him in authority over all the other leaders except for the king. And the other advisors were jealous that this foreign exile was going to be in authority over them, and they were not having it. They sought out a way to bring charges against him. They persuaded the king to make a decree that forbid anyone to pray to any other god or human for 30 days. Now, the Bible tells us that when Daniel heard this, he went home and he prayed as usual. Daniel trusted God no matter the outcome. Now, Daniel was discovered and he was arrested. The king regretfully sought a way to try and free him because he knew that this was unjust. But eventually, he had to obey his own decree, and Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Scripture tells us, though, at first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I done anything wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed, and he gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Daniel emerging from this lion's den unscathed is an undeniable miracle. It's not like the lions weren't hungry or they were sick or something, because in the next few verses, his accusers were put into that same pit, and they met a very different fate. The scripture says that Daniel was spared because he trusted his God. Part of me thinks, wow, Daniel really flexed some faith muscles here. But I also kind of think, what else was he going to do? He's in a pit of lions. He has no protection, no weapons, and he is experiencing his own undeniable powerlessness. But Daniel's trust isn't born in these moments of crisis and desperation. They are cultivated by daily practices of faith. And I think most of us can say we've never been in an actual pit of lions. But some things in life can seem like a pit. Sometimes, maybe it's even in our own heads. Sometimes there are thoughts that tear us down, thoughts that we're not enough, repeatedly thinking where we have failed. Questions of the unknown can nag and bring us down. Sometimes it's when there's an idea or a plan and your mind just automatically goes to why it won't work and looking at all the ways it will fail instead of pondering the possibilities. Expert Daniel, Dr. Amen, he's a brain expert and mental wellness specialist, calls these thoughts ANTS, which is an acronym for automatic negative thoughts. He encourages us to identify our negative thoughts, hold on to them for a minute, and to call them out, to test them with truth, and to really think, is this really true? Do I 100% know without a doubt that this will be the outcome? Often, our thoughts are influenced by our past hurts and experiences. And when we take these thoughts captive, we can keep them from hijacking our hopes and possibilities. Another lion's den feeling experience is when life just comes at you with one thing or another. I've had some conversations with folks this week who are struggling with health crises, experiencing loss of a loved one, financial burdens, or failing relationships. Sometimes all of that's happening at once. In these moments, God invites us to come to him. Even if prayer isn't part of our regular routine, it's never too late or a wrong time to consciously be in God's presence and share your heart and seek his. Sometimes it's in these moments when we are at the end of ourselves where we can connect with God the most. Now, there's another part of King Darius's observation of Daniel that I want to call to our attention. When he called out to him, he said, "Your God, whom you serve continually." Daniel wasn't only known for his faithfulness, but for putting his faith into action. He served the Gentile kings to the best of his abilities. The way that he served stood out. And it brings to mind the verse in Colossians, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." This mind shift can be huge. A lot of times, we're driven to work for the money or work for approval. But what if we were to work at what we were doing as if we were doing it for the Lord? This verse has helped me to check myself lots of times, especially when doing mundane housework that just seems to need to be done again and again. I felt frustrated and defeated, thinking that this is just going to need to be done again in a couple of hours. Ugh, why bother? But if I change my perspective in this way, it can bring a sense of joy and satisfaction. I feel more like I am blessing my family and blessing my home rather than just cleaning up after them. And as I pick up socks for the millionth time, they are everywhere, and I want to feel angry, I get nudged about how many times God has been patient with me in my repeated messes, and I'm a little more inclined to share that grace. But I'm still going to dump your dirty socks on your bed just to keep you accountable. When we have the privilege of serving together, and we get to serve with some pretty awesome folks around here, whether it's Helping Hands or Second Saturday or the thrift store or Grace for Kids or preparing the sanctuary for worship, preparing and serving meals, our children or student ministries, I know I can't mention them all. There are so many ways to serve. Whenever you walk in on Second Saturday, there are lots of smiling faces from our volunteers. It's fun to serve together. If you're looking for ways to get plugged in, I want to remind you about the CR team meeting next Sunday. You don't even have to be someone who is in recovery to be a part of this team. There are so many small ways that you can bless and support this ministry. Out in the welcome area, we have a card with almost all of our serve opportunities listed. We invite you to pick one up. They'll be available right after the service. Put your name on it and mark where you're interested in serving and leave it at the desk. We'll be happy to get in touch with you and get you connected. Now, Daniel's heroism isn't only because he sought God in life or death situations. It's because seeking God was part of who he was. It's how he lived out each day with his quiet and obedient faith. He learned a dependence on God from his daily discipline of prayer and time with him. Daniel shows us that heroic faith is born out of quiet daily practices. Daniel prioritized these practices. He was a leader with tremendous responsibilities, and he was in a culture that served at the whims of these maniacal and crazy rulers and who radically worshiped pagan gods. But he devoted all areas of his life to God, even when it came down to the food that he ate. He was devoted to seeking and honoring the Lord. Now, we aren't called into life-threatening situations, but God does call us into deeper relationship and reliance on him through our daily practices of prayer and serving. I want to go ahead and invite our worship team forward. If this is an area where you feel like you can grow, you can start out small. Remember, the only rule is to just show up. It's often in the small, still moments that we hear from God through scripture, a song, a friend, or a nudge in our soul. As we close, I want to invite you to the altar. Maybe this is a good time to practice a moment with God. You don't have to know what to say. Just come up. And you can even just say, Jesus. If you would like someone to pray with you, someone on the prayer team will do that. Just raise your hand.